I stood at the head of the gleaming conference table, the room's polished veneer belying decades of unspoken tradition. For 30 years, I'd claimed my place in these walls, orchestrating every foundation pour, ensuring every beam held true. Not this exact room. I'd migrated offices twice as Summit Core construction relocated, but this very position. Field Operations Director of Summit Core. My name is Gabriel Stanton. I'm 61, and I've devoted 3 decades to Summit Core, the last 20 steering every major commercial venture across Portland, Oregon. Through countless seasons, I kept my head low, eyes fixed on blueprints, and our crews safe. Deadlines bent only for storms or supply chain delays, yet the new voice addressing me implied I was relic. Carson Doyle, our freshly appointed Chief Operating Officer, plucked straight from a Silicon Valley tech firm, flipped through a digital reorganization proposal on his tablet without meeting my gaze. "We need someone who brings innovative strategies," his tone suggested finality. "Someone versed in cutting-edge methodologies. We require a comprehensive restructuring plan by next quarter." The board's unspoken verdict shimmered. My experience was now overhead. I nodded, absorbing each syllable without protest. No defense, no plea, only acknowledgement. That reaction brought a flicker of surprise to Doyle's eyes. He'd anticipated resistance. Perhaps conflict would justify his decision to the rest of the board. The meeting concluded with no new agreements, yet everything was understood. 30 years of institutional knowledge had been labeled obsolete. My office beckoned, a cramped enclave lined with filing cabinets and wall-to-wall site maps. I slid open the bottom drawer and retrieved a charcoal binder I'd meticulously assembled over 8 years. Not a grudge collection, but insurance against the very moment I faced now. Within those pages lay records of every permit rushed, every specification bypassed, documentation of battles I'd fought quietly behind closed doors. Each page bore neat block handwriting, dates, project names, inspector notes, not to confess wrongdoing, but to shield lives if profit ever eclipsed safety. I closed the drawer, allowing the binder to rest. Perhaps courtesy or loyalty would spare me, perhaps not. Through the window, I caught sight of Doyle shaking hands with a sharply dressed newcomer. Their laughter echoed across the lot. That moment stripped any remaining doubt. My role was ending. Summit Core's story began under Victor Caldwell, a visionary who transformed a modest carpentry outfit into one of the Pacific Northwest's premier developers. I joined his team when muddy boots and sagging tarps defined progress. "Remember, Gabriel," Caldwell taught during site inspections, "we build for people, not just profit. Every shortcut collects its debt in time." His credo shaped me, the blueprint confidant, the man who memorized codes and spotted issues before the first shovel hit dirt. When Victor retired in 2010, his son Ethan Caldwell assumed leadership. Ethan admired bold growth, not measured pacing. "We must outpace rivals," he proclaimed in management meetings. "Rules slow us, interpretations speed us ahead." I objected. Privately, he warned me, "Your dedication is valued, but adaptation is our new mantra." He tasted of courtesy while endorsing premature foundation pours. Those permits always cleared eventually, thanks to goodwill I'd cultivated among inspectors. That inaugural unauthorized foundation marked my binder's first entry. Not spite, but survival. Over the years, my protests softened into annotations. I recorded each unauthorized material substitution, early mobilization, permit footnote, contradicting approved specs. My dissent faded into fine print. Summit Core's corridors came to regard me as reliable, if antiquated, a guardian of bygone processes while executives celebrated accelerating timelines. Then, 5 months earlier, I welcomed Carson Doyle, 35 years old, an MBA in hand, but not a single week of field experience. Ethan introduced him as the future architect of our operations model. I extended my hand, fully aware the fracture that had been growing beneath Summit Core's foundation had reached my office door. 3 months later, Doyle returned with Laura Chen from Human Resources. Consultants had scrutinized workflows, secret board sessions, reshaped hierarchies, and 4 new managers under 40, each with pristine business resumes and 0 construction grit, claimed roles I'd held. "We're moving to a decentralized site supervision model," Doyle announced. "The field operations director role is eliminated, replaced by specialized team leads." His tone bore no invitation to debate. I replied with calm neutrality. My nod sealed my fate. 30 years of service distilled into a 15-minute decommissioning. They offered 6-month severance, extended benefits, and occasional consulting, as needed. In plain terms, they were firing me kindly but firmly. "When does this take effect?" I asked. "Immediately," Doyle replied, glancing at his watch. "Today is your final day." Laura walked me through paperwork, then accompanied me to my office. Inside, I packed a chipped coffee mug, a framed photograph of my late wife, Evelyn, and nothing else. Company files stayed behind. I slipped only the charcoal binder into my bag. By midday, I sat in my old pickup truck, engine off, facing the Portland skyline. 6 towers I'd helped erect stood silent in the distance. Years of missed birthdays, of weekend site calls when Evelyn was ill, of late nights designing safe passageways, all culminated in this moment. I turned the key but didn't drive home. Instead, I headed to the city building safety department downtown. Sabrina Chen, no relation to Laura, had been a junior inspector when I first met her 25 years ago. Now she directed the bureau. She greeted me with surprise. "Gabrielle? What brings you here? A site issue?" I shook my head. "No, I've been let go from Summit Core." Her eyes widened. "They fired you?" That's insanity. She offered coffee. I set the charcoal binder on her desk. "Read this first," I said. 2 weeks passed without word from Summit Core or Sabrina. I reorganized my home office while old colleagues phoned in disbelief. Severance checks arrived, generous, but prorated. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. Carson Doyle. "Gabriel, hope you're well." His voice sounded unnaturally light. "We're encountering permit complications at the Riverstone Center project. Could you consult for us?" Riverstone Center was Summit Core's marquee mixed-use development, groundbreaking 3 months ago. "What's the issue?" I asked. "Inspector Lee is raising concerns about modified plans," Doyle replied. "We thought you'd help," he added hesitantly. "I'm available at a consulting rate of $300 an hour, 2-day minimum retainer," I stated. Silence. "That's steep," Doyle conceded. "We were hoping for your old salary rate." "That applied to employees," I reminded him. "Consultants command market fees." More silence. "Let me talk to Ethan," he said finally. By day's end, Ethan Caldwell agreed to my terms, but made clear it was a one-time engagement. The next morning, I met project manager Adrian Scott at the Riverstone site. Immediately I saw the problem. The foundation had been pushed nearly 6 feet into the setback zone to enlarge ground floor retail space. "Ask forgiveness, not permission," I murmured. Carson and Adrian greeted me. "Gabriel, thanks for coming. Inspector Lee threatens a stop work order." Adrian shifted uncomfortably. "Did you submit revised plans?" I asked. "They're in review," Adrian stammered. "We needed to keep momentum." "This affects drainage, fire egress, utilities," I noted. Carson interjected, voice hopeful. "Could you persuade Megan Lee to approve the change while we finalize paperwork?" I gazed across the half-built foundation, sensing the structure of Shortcut's buckle. They provided every document, original plans, amendments, permit applications, approval letters, without hesitation. That afternoon, I phoned Megan Lee from my study. "You've been busy," she said. "They asked me to intervene on Riverstone," I explained. "What did you tell them?" She laughed. "I said I'd consult you. Now, will you convince me to overlook their creative interpretation of approved plans?" I paused. "No. I made it clear I cannot compromise my integrity." That evening, I laid out the original blueprints beside the amended schematics. My finger traced handwritten margin notes on runoff angles and load calculations. Each entry a testament to past compromises I'd documented. These were not chronicles of malice, but records to protect lives when expediency threatened safety. In the dim light, I realized the binder would no longer gather dust. It would confront corporate hubris head-on. Sleep eluded me. Instead, I replayed memories, calming inspectors to avert stop work orders, coaxing bureaucrats to grant variances, consoling colleagues after on-site injuries. Each memory validated every entry in my binder. Tomorrow, I would walk into Megan Lee's office not as a veteran left behind, but as an authority whose conscience remained intact. Summit Core's shortcuts would face the ledger I'd built. My voice, once confined to marginalia, would resonate across boardrooms and building sites alike, demanding integrity above expediency. I leaned forward, voice low against the hum of espresso machines. "I'm going to help you understand exactly what they've changed, when, where, and how, and which other sites might mirror those alterations. The problem isn't just Riverfront Plaza. It's every active Summit Core project across Portland." Sabrina Chen nodded, her gaze steady. We'd agreed to meet at the Hazelwood Cafe, far enough from both downtown and Summit Core's glass tower that no one would spot us. She opened her satchel and slid a slim blue folder toward me. "After reading your documentation," she said, fingers tracing the binder's edge, "I pulled every Summit Core permit application from the last 5 years. I cross-checked approved designs with inspection reports." Across the table, she set down another folder, its tab labeled Field Deviations. Inside lay 8 meticulously labeled photo packets. Each contained side-by-side images, approved elevation drawings on the left, real-time construction shots on the right. Extra square footage here, thicker girders swapped for cheaper alloy there, foundation trenches extended beyond setback lines, changes subtle enough that a hurried inspector might gloss over them, yet significant enough to compromise load calculations or fire suppression pathways. My heart thudded as I leafed through the pages. Seeing every infraction laid bare still stung, even though I'd suspected Summit Core's tactics for years. Sabrina's tone dropped further. "This isn't accidental cutting of corners. It's a systematic, calculated flouting of building codes, and it reaches all the way to the top." She glanced around the cafe, then whispered, "Ethan Caldwell has been leaning on my department for ages, phoning city council members whenever we enforce compliance, branding us anti-business. 2 inspectors who flagged Summit Core violations were quietly reassigned last quarter." I closed my eyes for a moment, the weight of our shared history pressing in. "Why come forward now? You've known about these practices forever." Sabrina's gaze softened with weary resolve. "Because your records form an irrefutable pattern. It's not one inspector versus a powerful developer. It's company-wide misconduct. And because I'm retiring in 3 months, I have nothing left to lose. But I need someone who not only knows the technical details, but can explain them to people who've never set foot on a job site." I exhaled, absorbing her words. Summit Core hadn't just dismissed me. They'd removed the one professional who could testify about every corner cut with absolute authority. I reached into my messenger bag and withdrew my own binder, charcoal-covered, bulging with handwritten logs. "After they fired me," I said, flipping to the first yellowed page. I reviewed 8 years of personal notes, every project's deviations, every material substitution, every early groundbreaking. There's a method behind it. Together, we pored over spreadsheets and margin notes, how Summit Core consistently amended plans post-approval to eke out additional leasable square footage, how they swapped specified steel reinforcements for cheaper alloys that looked identical but saved thousands, how they began excavation before final permits, banking on my relationships with inspectors to grease the process. I showed chart after chart I'd crafted, dates, project names, estimated cost savings, safety risks flagged. Sabrina tapped her pen. "How high up does this go?" she asked, voice hushed. "Ethan, certainly." He set the tone when he succeeded his father. Carson Doyle, I continued, was brought in to streamline operations. Less oversight, fewer checks. The mid-level managers implement his vision. I closed the binder with a firm snap. And now they want me back to keep the system running. They think I'm desperate or loyal, or both. Sabrina took a deep breath. Riverfront Plaza alone warrants an immediate stop work order. But if we're going to hold Summit Core accountable comprehensively, we need to hit every active site at once. We mobilize full inspections, document reviews, material testing. We'll shut down their entire operation for weeks, maybe months. The economic fallout will be enormous. Jobs paused, payments delayed, trust eroded. Her words hung heavy between us. I placed a hand over the binder. Buildings are for people. I've spent my career making sure they stand. Losing a paycheck won't stop me now. Sabrina stood and gathered her things. "All right," she said, voice resolute. "Let's do this right. I need everything you have, organized by project, names, dates, precise violations. We start with Riverfront Plaza tomorrow." I left the cafe feeling neither vindicated nor triumphant, but resolved. This was never about revenge. It was about the integrity of every structure in Portland. And now, I'd enforce it from the outside. Dawn broke crisp and clear when I pulled onto the Riverfront Plaza site. Carson Doyle was already pacing by the trailers, phone pressed to his ear. His tie was loosened, his expression taut with anxiety. He spotted me and hung up. "Did you speak with Inspector Chen?" he demanded. "I did," I replied calmly. We discussed every modification in depth. Relief flickered across his features. "So, can we continue work while the revised plans are processed?" I unfolded a set of annotated schematics on a makeshift table. The setback alterations, drainage rerouting, utility conflicts, they're substantial enough to require full review. Proper protocol demands pausing all impacted areas until approval is finalized. Carson's brow darkened. "That's not why we hired you. We brought you in for your expertise and your connections." I maintained eye contact. I provided both. My professional opinion is that these changes necessitate a thorough review, and my relationship with Inspector Chen ensures she explained the process instead of immediately issuing a stop work order. He barked a frustrated laugh. "This is nonsense. Ethan told me you'd smooth things over." Ethan and I disagree on definitions of smooth. I've fulfilled my contract, consulted on permit issues. My recommendation is clear. Revert to approved plans immediately, or brace for significant delays. Carson stormed off to make a call, likely to Ethan. I turned to Lucas Reyes, the site foreman I'd known for 15 years. He approached, shoulders hunched. "They've got you building outside the permits," I said quietly. Lucas glanced around, voice low. "Orders from above. They said new permits are imminent." I tapped the plans. "They're not. More inspectors are headed here soon. My advice: match every beam and foundation trench to the approved documents. No extras." Lucas nodded grimly. He knew what was coming. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Ethan Caldwell's name flashed across the screen. "Gabriel." His voice was cool, measured. "Carson tells me you're refusing to help us with Riverfront Plaza." "I've done exactly what you contracted me to do," I replied. "I provided expert consultation and clarity on the permit issues." "Don't play games," he countered. "You know what we needed." I held my ground. "You needed someone to help skirt building codes. That was never my job at Summit Corp, and it's not my role as a consultant." Silence stretched. Then Ethan spoke, voice deceptively calm. "I've always respected you. That's why your severance was generous. But if you're working against Summit Corp's interests, we'll have to reconsider the arrangement." His threat was clear. Back down or lose everything. I hung up and dialed Sabrina. "It's happening. Ethan's threatening to cancel my severance." "Perfect," she said. "Inspection teams assemble tomorrow. We start at Riverfront, then move site to site all week. Once Summit Corp realizes, they'll scramble to cover tracks." The next morning, I watched from my truck as Sabrina arrived at Riverfront Plaza with 3 inspectors and the city attorney. Carson's face went pale as his phone calls multiplied. By noon, work had halted entirely. Crews clustered in concerned huddles, while inspectors meticulously logged every deviation. My phone chimed. A text from Lucas. "What the hell did you do?" I stared ahead, unshaken. This was never personal. It was about doing the job correctly, regardless of paychecks or titles. 1 month later, I sat in the gallery of the Portland City Council chamber as Sabrina delivered her findings. The room was packed. Contractors, reporters, Summit Corp employees. Ethan and Carson sat in the front row, flanked by corporate attorneys. With clinical precision, Sabrina's slides revealed violations across a dozen Summit Corp sites. Unauthorized footprint expansions, substituted materials compromising structural strength, foundations poured without final permits. "These are not isolated mistakes," she concluded, voice unwavering. "Our investigation, supported by exhaustive documentation from former Summit Corp Operations Director Gabriel Stanton, demonstrates a deliberate pattern of code violations spanning 8 years. Ethan's eyes locked onto mine, not with anger, but defeat. The city attorney rose next. "Based on these findings, we are issuing emergency stop work orders for all active Summit Corp projects. Comprehensive inspections of completed buildings from the past decade will occur at the company's expense." The chamber buzzed with stunned murmurs. This was more than a fine. It was a corporate crisis. "When the room settles," the attorney added, "we will refer this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges related to falsified permit documents." I saw Carson's knuckles whiten as he gripped the armrest. He too had signed off on those documents after Summit Corp's restructuring. I didn't stay for the press scrum. I didn't watch Ethan face reporters. I walked to my truck as my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Samuel Carter, owner of North Star Supply, Corn, one of Summit Corp's competitors." "Gabriel." His voice crackled with opportunity. "I heard what happened." "We should talk. I need someone who knows how to do things right." 6 months later, I stood on the 19th floor of a half-finished office tower in downtown Portland. My new title, Director of Compliance and Quality Control at North Star Construction, felt purposeful. Around me, steel beams were bolted with exacting precision, just as the engineered plan specified. The wind rattled the high-rise, but I barely noticed. My assistant, Megan Riley, interrupted my reverie. "Inspector Chen just signed off on the drainage revisions," she said, handing me her tablet. She said it's the most thorough documentation she's ever seen. A small smile tugged at my lips. "Good," I replied. "Schedule the concrete pour for next week, weather permitting, and ensure all environmental monitors are in place before work resumes." My phone buzzed with a news alert. I'd set notifications for anything mentioning Summit Corp. The headline read, "Summit Corp CEO Ethan Caldwell steps down amid ongoing investigations." I slipped the phone into my pocket without reading further. Summit Core had survived the storm, barely. Some sites cleared compliance, others were mothballed. Thousands of jobs had been disrupted, and the company's standing in Portland lay in tatters. Carson Doyle had quietly returned to California, his reputation in ruins. My office here at North Star was modest compared to Summit Core's sleek tower. Yet I wouldn't trade it for any corner office. As Megan and I rode the construction elevator back to ground level, she asked, "Do you ever regret what happened?" I paused at the lobby doors. Around us, the site hummed with focused activity. Every bolt torque checked, every survey measurement verified. "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "I built my career on doing things right. That never changes." I stepped off the elevator into the organized hum of the Southport construction site, the mid-morning light catching on steel girders that reached skyward like teeth of an iron defiant. At my side, Megan Riley paused by the safety barrier, her tablet in hand, eyes scanning the live feed from the environmental monitors I'd insisted on. We'd agreed earlier that oversight would be our mantra. Thorough documentation, precise measurements, uncompromising integrity. No surprises. No shortcuts. Every bolt, every beam, every slab poured in strict adherence to the approved plans. The wind carried the scent of curing concrete and the distant hum of traffic along the Willamette River. Portland's skyline, obscured by cranes and scaffold today, stood as a reminder of what proper construction could yield. A city grown tall on foundations that didn't fracture under pressure. As I surveyed the site, my gaze settled on the north facade of the opaque curtain wall. The panels aligned with mathematical precision, each seam flush with its neighbor. The facade rose steadily, level by level, exactly where the engineering diagrams specified. It was a scene I'd once thought impossible to witness. A high-rise office tower assembled not by expedience, but by unwavering fidelity to code, balance, and the safety of every future occupant. For 30 years, I'd labored under Summit Core's directive to push the limits of construction, an edict that often meant telling inspectors what they wanted to hear, hoping paperwork would catch up after the fact. Now, here at North Star Construction, I watched a different ethos at work. Compliance as the core principle, quality control as our shield. Megan glanced up from her screen. "Inspector Chen just signed off on the seismic bracing," she reported, voice bright. "She said it's the most thorough documentation she's ever seen." A wave of satisfaction washed through me. I smiled and nodded. "Excellent," I replied, my voice steady. "Ensure the bracing specs are filed in both digital and hard copy formats, and schedule the next inspection window for the mechanical tie-ins on Friday morning." I paused, then added, "Let the subcontractors know. No deviations, no exceptions. We adhere to the approved MEP drawings without alteration." She tapped her tablet with swift authority. "Understood. I'll send the notices immediately." As Megan walked away, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. Less than a year ago, I was fighting for the right to tell Summit Core what it meant to build responsibly. My binders of handwritten annotations, once seen as evidence of back-channel dissent, had become the keystone of a citywide enforcement action that laid bare Summit Core's systemic violations. I'd watched from the council chamber's back row as Inspector Chen revealed slide after slide of infractions. Unauthorized expansions, material substitutions that compromised structural integrity, foundations poured without final permits. Those momentous disclosures had forced the company's CEO, Ethan Caldwell, to step down in disgrace. Carson Doyle, the once confident COO, retreated to California, his corporate reputation in tatters. I'd expected a sense of triumphant vindication, but instead I'd felt only an abiding relief. Relief that the city's buildings would now be framed by accountability. relief that I could once again build with a clear conscience. Today, with Megan by my side and a team dedicated to doing things right, I felt the culmination of a long journey, a journey defined by the conviction that every structure deserved to stand on truth. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I retrieved it and saw the headline I'd long anticipated. Summit Core successor firm, North Star Construction, hailed for ethical practices. The brief article praised North Star's rapid rise to prominence, attributing it to senior compliance expert Gabriel Stanton's unwavering commitment to integrity. A warmth filled my chest, but I resisted the urge to read on. I pocketed the device and turned back to the tower rising before me. Every detail mattered. The laser-leveled formwork on the 18th floor, the calibrated torque wrenches in the hands of steel erectors, the weld inspection records scanned into the project's BIM model in real time. I remembered the countless late nights at Summit Core, pacing atop half-finished roofs as I fought to hold projects together with phone calls to inspectors and whispered assurances. I remembered the shame I carried when I slipped out of the Summit Core headquarters with nothing but a bulging binder and a resolve to reveal the truth. But here, at North Star, I no longer felt burdened by clandestine contradictions. I felt liberated by transparency. I strode toward the trailer where the day's morning meeting was taking place. As I approached, subcontractor foremen and site supervisors looked up, their faces reflecting confidence in a process they trusted. Even the union tradespeople nodded as I passed, offering curt waves, gestures of respect earned through months of consistent adherence to code. Inside the trailer, my colleagues had already gathered around the video wall. A matrix of camera feeds showed key zones, concrete placement, steel erection, mechanical coordination, environmental safeguards. The project manager, Rafael Ortega, stood at the whiteboard, outlining the day's tasks. When he saw me enter, he paused the feed and smiled. "Morning, Gabriel," he greeted. "Inspection crews are scheduled for 10 a.m. The Battalion plan has been stamped by both civil and structural. We're clear to proceed." I returned the smile and stepped to the front. "Good work, Rafael. Let's maintain our momentum. Today's focus: coordination between the facade installers and the waterproofing team. Remember, the approved sequence must be followed. Install the membrane system, run the drain lines, then apply the pressure-equalized rain screen. No shortcuts." I turned to the group. "If anyone spots an anomaly, misaligned fasteners, gaps in the thermal break, raise the flag immediately. We don't want post-installation punch lists that compromise weatherproofing." Heads nodded in unified agreement. I tapped a marker on the board. "Also, team, be vigilant about control joints in the concrete panels. Our material supplier's new mix has a slightly different shrinkage rate. The specs call for a 12-inch spacing, not 16. The structural drawings reflect that update. Let's stick to the plan." The foreman conferred quietly, and Rafael confirmed every detail. As I watched them disperse back to their zones, I realized how far I'd come. From a solitary whistleblower archiving every concession to an architect of a process built on collective diligence. North Star's culture thrived on shared responsibility. The camaraderie here still embraced humanity, but it was anchored in transparency, not secrecy. By midday, the sky had turned a crystalline blue, and the tower's shadow swept across the laydown yard. I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The cacophony of drills and cranes receded to a background murmur as I closed my eyes. Memories surfaced. The photo of Evelyn, my late wife, tucked in my pocket. A reminder of love lost to the relentless demands of a career that once prioritized deadlines over family. I pulled out the worn snapshot. Evelyn smiling at a rooftop garden opening, arms outstretched against a Seattle skyline. We'd planned to retire there together, to fill our days with quiet mornings and late afternoon sunsets. But work had claimed her final years. I slid the photo back and opened my messenger bag. Among the papers was the last note I ever wrote at Summit Corps, penned with trembling hand. Buildings bear witness to our values. If corners are cut, lives will pay. Back then, it was a private admonition to myself. Today, it was public policy. I straightened and let a thin smile settle. That's where I stand, I murmured to the wind. Returning to the site's perimeter fence, I noticed 2 new apprentices watching the tower like mesmerized apprentices of old. One fiddled with a laser distance meter, the other checked level readings on a concrete test cylinder. Their youthful enthusiasm reminded me of my own first days at the job, when every blueprint felt like a promise of transformation. I approached them. "How's it going?" I asked, voice warm but firm. They looked up, startled to see me. I'd overheard their conversation. They were preparing for a morning seminar on seismic design. "We're good, sir," one stammered. The other added, "We're just double-checking the tension measurements on the guy wires. We want to make sure we get it right." I nodded approvingly. "Good. That's exactly the right attitude. Details matter. A 0.5% deviation can be the difference between code compliance and a catastrophic failure. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and always document your findings. That record, your notes, could save lives one day." Their eyes brightened, and they returned to their work with renewed focus. I felt a surge of pride. Not only was I overseeing a project built to last, I was also mentoring the next generation of conscientious builders. For them, integrity was no afterthought. It was the blueprint. As afternoon waned, I convened the site's weekly safety huddle. We gathered under the awning of the temporary office, the sun slanting at an angle that cast long shadows across concrete barrels and scaffold ladders. Megan led off with environmental monitoring results, air quality within thresholds, noise impact below permitted levels, and I followed with a concise summary of structural milestones and upcoming permit reviews. Every report was data-driven, every action item assigned, every question met with documented answers. At the end of the meeting, I looked around at faces lined with concentration and resolve. "Thank you, everyone," I said. "Take pride in today's work. We're proving that construction can be safe, efficient, and honest. That's what North Star stands for." Applause rose, soft but genuine. When the group dispersed, I lingered by the fold-out table, flipping through the huddle's printed minutes. A final note caught my eye. The forthcoming quarterly town hall, where North Star would publish a public compliance report. We'd lead by example, fully transparent to investors, regulators, and the community. I closed the binder with a sense of completion. Then, almost reflexively, I allowed myself to answer the question that Megan had posed days before. Do I ever regret what happened with Summit Corps? I looked up at the tower, its facade gleaming, its joints aligned, its presence commanding attention without apology. "No," I said quietly to myself, "I don't regret doing the job right. Never have, never will." The words felt weighty, carrying the echo of every inspection report, every late-night entry in my charcoal binder, every whispered conversation with Inspector Chen. They carried the voices of those 2 apprentices striving to learn, of the tradespeople who trusted my leadership, and of Evelyn, whose memory had inspired my resolve. Above me, a beam slowly lowered into place, disappearing into the steel skeleton with a soft clang. The tower rose level and true, built to last. It was exactly where it should be. I stepped back into the elevator lobby, the site's life humming around me. A final glance at the rising structure reminded me that integrity isn't a compromise. It's the foundation on which everything else rests. As the doors closed and carried me downward, I carried that truth with me, just like it should be.